But it is such a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you for allowing me to do this interview and allowing us to come here to the studios of Key West, where you are an artist in residency this month.
Well, it's my pleasure to have you here. I want to thank the studios for allowing us to use their beautiful veranda, and I'm looking forward to the interview.
Bud, we're focusing this morning on the release of your new book entitled Key West Confidential. This is a collection of stories plucked from almost 35 years of life on this island. How did this all come about?
Well, actually, the stories have been told over and over again to lots of people over the years, and they've been asking me, where is the book? This would make a great book. There are lots of stories. So what I did is I tried to remember the best stories, put them in chronological order to sort of give an idea of how the people and perhaps the city and the view of life maybe has changed over the years. I think the most important thing for me was the tone of the book, so that it didn't sound like somebody writing about the good old days, because there's certainly still a lot of incredible people in town, and it's obviously a lovely place to live, and a very exceptional place, a very giving, generous place. But it was an extraordinarily desolate and sort of improvisational place when I first got here, and when everybody else, there's a whole bunch of us that got here in the mid to late 70s, and so I just thought it would be good to chronicle that, because I've never seen it in print. And so it's an actual, now it's part of the history of the island, and I thought that somebody should write it down.
Absolutely. Now, you talk a lot about how much Key West has changed today than what it used to be like in the past. Let's talk a little bit about the good, the bad.
Well, the good is still the good. The good is, you know, it's a remarkably beautiful place and a remarkably kind-hearted and generous place. I used to tell people that, you know, I never lived anywhere where there were more benefits in a place where people had less money. You know, I think the bars here started the idea. Actually, Amy, when she had bar Mangoes, was the first to suggest that, you know, she would have benefits where no one made any money. The bartenders didn't keep their tips. Nobody got paid. If you needed to have money that night, you were free to go find some somewhere else. But I mean, and that became a norm throughout the town, that, you know, when there are benefits here, it's not like after the band gets paid or after the bartenders get tipped out. Everybody puts in their money and their effort and their ingenuity. And so I've never seen any place that does it the way Key West does it.
Mm-hmm. So that's the good. Let's talk about some of the bad changes.
People ask me, visitors will say, what's it like to live here? And I say, well, Manhattan prices, Alabama wages. And so, you know, unfortunately, a lot of my friends who work here virtually never get out on the water because they're working 3 jobs. There's very little housing for people that are working day to day here in Key West, because so many of the houses, especially here in Old Town, have been converted into guest houses. There's literally a lot fewer rooms than there were back in the 80s and 70s. So there's just more people wanting to live here, more expensive to be here, and jobs that don't pay very much and very high rents. And so that part of it is very difficult.
Most memorable, fascinating story?
Of all time?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sure I can't tell that. You know, I don't know. It's very hard to pick out one extraordinary story. I mean, the whole thing that I tried to project in the book, and that I was with Tony Falcone, who had Fastbuck Freddy's, the greatest store ever, that unfortunately is no longer with us. Another aspect of the changes that have taken place here for the bad. You know, I said, when I interviewed Tony, I said, you know, the thing I used to tell people about Key West is that people live in their imaginations. And he loved that. You know, for instance, Fantasy Fest, which is now this, you know, gigantic money engine and corporately sponsored, started with a couple of gay men sitting around saying, let's throw a party. And, you know, that seemed to be the way the whole city ran itself. I mean, there was a subset of us. Of course, there was always a real city government. But we didn't pay much attention to it, and they sort of enjoyed the fact, I think. It took, you know, there was genuine appreciation for conch life. There's something else that I think maybe is a little bit lost now for people coming into the island. They have to appreciate that they're coming to somebody else's home. And I think it's very important to learn the ways of the people who were born and raised here, because they're extraordinary people. And they have a reason to sort of sometimes feel a little resentful toward people who just come here and they, for instance, want the roosters to stop crowing because I'm paying a lot of money for this house and I didn't come here to listen to roosters. I said, well, then why did you come here? So there's a little bit of that. I'm digressing. But the best story ever, I couldn't pick one. I really couldn't pick one. There are many, many extraordinary stories. But the thing that stands out to me, though, is stories about generosity. There are lots of, wild, crazy stories. But fundamentally, as I say in the book, actually, the thing I would say that most stands out in my mind is the response of the entire community to AIDS when it first hit this town like a sledgehammer. Because when AIDS first hit this town, it didn't have a name. Nobody knew what was going on. People thought it could be contagious. It could be in the air like tuberculosis. Nobody knew how it was transmitted, what was going on. All these incredibly handsome gay guys were starting to literally melt right in front of your eyes. And sometimes people would let them die in rooms alone because they were afraid to go into those rooms. And then you'd find certain individuals around town who didn't even know these people, who said, look, I'm going to put a cold compress on that person's forehead. I don't care if I die by doing it. And this is the bravest thing I've ever seen anybody do. And this was at a time when, the gay community was still being looked upon as a sort of effete, namby-pamby bunch of people by people who had never met a gay person or didn't have any gay associates. And I said, and I was one of them. And I said, man, these are some of the bravest, toughest, most generous, open-hearted people I've ever met in my life. So I would say that's the one signature revelation that occurred to me as a newcomer to Key West.
Bud, you talk about so many notable characters in your book. Give us a little summary this morning on some of them. Tennessee Williams, let's start with.
I always worship Tennessee Williams as a writer because he's a poet, more so than a playwright. I mean, one of the reasons it's so terrific that his plays are so popular is because they're written in poetry. And, Shakespeare is popular too. But in the 20th century, it's remarkable that people would actually sit down and listen to some extraordinary words. And again, not to go back to the same theme, but it's important for people to realize, and almost impossible for people to realize in 2014, that it was a serious crime to be a homosexual until very recently in this country. And in fact, Florida was one of the last states in the country to not make it a crime to be a homosexual. So despite that fact, and another accolade to Key West, which had been an island nation unto itself long before Florida even existed. Florida was settled from the north to the south by Henry Flagler. Key West was a very wealthy community in the middle of nowhere unto itself. Long before there was any Miami, there was no Tallahassee, there was no West Palm, there was none of that. So Key West has a notion and a history of sort of calling its own rules. And so it became a haven for homosexuals at a time when they were criminals everywhere else in the country, hence Tennessee Williams being here. And I always thought once I'd met him that he was the most heartbroken person I'd ever met. Incredibly generous, forcing a smile all the time, trying to be happy, but you knew that deep down inside there was some serious pain in Tennessee Williams, but nevertheless, never a complaint, and as I say, almost trying too hard to be the life of the party and sort of thing. So that would be my impression of Tennessee.
People have to pick up a copy of your book to hear more about the notable characters you wrote all about. But you mentioned poetry for a second, and I want everybody to know that you are also an accomplished poet. Can you give us a little tease this morning?
Sure. Well, in fact, I'm the Robert Frost Poet in Residence, right where we're sitting. So yeah, this is my first impression of Key West, and it was written before there was such a thing as rap. So it's clear to me that rap was in the air. You could feel it in the air, and this happens in the arts a lot. That's why abstract expressionism will happen all at once, or various kinds of movements in the arts. It just somehow happens. And so I wrote this before I'd ever heard any rap music. And it just says, Sunburst, bust out, outlaws, fast lane, night love, Juilliard, street dance, all soul review, and gypsy moons, hot low tunes, lines so fine, some fine old lines, rollin', rollin', rollin' in the sun, running brown, stripped down, downtown be found. Downtown street so sweet, bakery smells linger there, fresh squeezed juices, fair is fair, Cuban coffee in the air, double black snaps your back, new boutiques, natural this and that, far gone wanderers burnt in the breeze, dogs raise their eyes beneath bumpers and trees, Zambu play the congas under the stars while will juggles fire and hips sway, desire at the edge of the sea, con leche, con Cuba, Antigua, Aruba, coconut, guava, mango, papaya, banana, añejo, marijuana, mañana, veranda, meander to rainbows of coral and rainbows that fly, parrots, macaws, gems in the sky, snapper and grouper and shrimp by the ton, bougainvillea splashed on a sky as crimson and gold as the pirates who spy on the shipwreck survive, strobe lights and soap bubbles burst in my eyes, cayoeso, cayoeso, dance till you die, dance through the floor, now dance some more, chant, play the congas, maracas and bells, talk to the woman who weaves the best spells, fly with the nighthawk and dive for your food, shake it, don't break it, everything's cool, everyone's high, every time's new, the world is for you, love it and feed it and give it away, shake it all night and roll it all day, kiss it and hug it, it shows you the way to say gracias, right on, dig that my man, say now Bubba, world's got your hand, 5 on 5, and the man with the plan is that slow moving devil with eyebrows that talk like where you be going when you go for a walk, sunrise and champagne and flying fish shine, flashing the lightning that rolls in your spine, splash it and eat it and pray for it too, it flows in your veins, it adds up to you, so blue, so true at the end of the day, when twists do that tune on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away, just sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time.
Beautiful, Bud. That was beautiful. I enjoyed that. Thank you for sharing that with us. And before we go today, what's next for you?
Well, if Cheryl has a will, it would be a sequel to this book. But since this book is not out yet, I thought it would be a good idea to have people read it a bit, see how it does, and then maybe head into a sequel, which was really not my intention at all. I'm in the middle of a novel called Seekers, and I just won second prize here at the studios of Key West 2 nights ago for the annual Write a Novel in a Month contest called The Rites of Spring. And that was for an excerpt from this novel. So I would like to pursue finishing that book. Next year there'll be a collection of my poems. I've written some plays. There'll be some scenes from plays. A more literary book will be coming out.
All right, Bud, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to reading that sequel.
My pleasure.